Hello, welcome to Morningsun Herb Farm. My name is Rose Loveall. I own Morningsun Herb Farm, a specialty nursery located in Northern California. We are on week 7 of our 8-week series all about herbs. We've discussed many things so far, including basils, container garden, lemony herbs, ethnic herbs, gardening in raised beds, lots of different things already. Today, however, we are focusing on lavender. We don't have a big field here at Morningsun, but we have a very diverse field of lavender that we use for cutting, for our stock plants, and for testing different varieties to see whether we like new varieties or not. Right now in our little field, we have 29 varieties of lavender. Now I can talk about lavender for days. If you're interested in some more specifics of lavender, like how to harvest lavender for drying or how to prune lavender, we've already got some great videos on our YouTube channel for those things. So today you're going to just see me talk a little bit about those things. Today instead I'm going to really talk and emphasize the different varieties of lavender, especially English lavender and some of the hybrid lavenders that are so popular for growing in the US. So I'm standing here by probably our most popular lavender plant we grow, the English lavender. This first lavender we're looking at is Lavandula angustifolia Hidcoto Blue. Lavandula angustifolia is an English lavender. There are more than 250 varieties of English lavender. This one is probably our most popular. This is our workhorse, which is why we have 2 rows of it here in our field. We use it for fresh cut. We use it for cooking, we use it for making lavender jam, ice cream, jellies, bar drinks, any sort of sweet foods you can use this particular lavender for. English lavender is a little bit different than some of the hybrids that we grow in the garden. English lavenders are, first of all, the first to bloom. After the Spanish and French lavenders, of course, but the English lavenders bloom here in California in May and June, and then we prune them back, and pretty much all the English lavenders are going to rebloom if they're pruned back hard. They'll rebloom in the fall. They're lower growing. The purples tend to be more purple, very dark color, and the most fragrant. So these English lavenders, like this one here, Hidcoto Blue, this is a good one to really show you the difference between the lavenders, the calyx and the corolla. So the corolla is what we commonly think of as the flower petal. The corollas, when we dry them, this is the part that actually falls out of the flower. So we don't usually think of this when we're talking about cooking with lavender, but when it's fresh, it's great to be able to cook with this part of the lavender. So the flowers are very floral on the English lavender. You can eat them. They have a little bit of lavender flavor. More importantly, they have a lot of floral undertones to them. The other part of the flower we're really concerned with, though, is the calyx, and that's the part that we're most concerned with when we're looking at drying. So here we've got our English lavender, Hidcoto Blue, and that little dark nubby part, oftentimes that's called the bud of the lavender. It's not actually a flower bud, it's actually where the seed is going to be. But see how dark purple that is? That's important when you're looking at your lavenders, if you want to dry them, whether you're using them for sachets or for wreath making. You want to know what the color is. So we'll compare this a little bit later with our hybrids. So English lavender, Hidcoto Blue, it gets about 18 to 20 inches tall when it's blooming. It's perfect for a hedge. And one of the things people always ask me with the lavenders is how far apart should I grow them? Depends on the size of the lavender, right? So when we're looking here at our English lavenders first, you're going to see medium to small size plants. This hedge of English lavender we have planted about 18 to 20 inches apart. So it's very full and thick, and even when it's not blooming. Even when it's not blooming, you can see that it stays together as a hedge. So if you want your plantings to all come together and stay together, you'll lose some of your flowers that way. But even when they're not blooming, that way you have a solid hedge growing as opposed to individual plants. So I want you just to notice we've harvested about half this row for fresh cut to take to the markets. That is not our final cut. And if you look at the videos we have on how to prune lavender, you'll see us cutting lavender, and most people look at the videos and they go, oh, because we prune them way back. If you're only pruning like this, you're just pruning the flowers off, you're going to get a very woody plant. And I'm sure going to show you some cases where we've done some poor pruning today so you can see what it looks like after a few years of poor pruning. So Hidcoto Blue, English lavender, right to the other side of the walkway. We have very closely related. This one is called Munstead, Lavandula angustifolia Munstead. It's another really old classic variety. And again, you can see the flowers are a little bit bigger, a little bit lighter colored than the Hidcoto, a little bit farther apart, but notice that calyx is, see how dark purple and fuzzy it is? So those are beautiful for sachet making. You know, you're going to have a dark purple flower that dries that way. And we'll actually show you that in a different video. So make sure you look at our how to dry and clean lavender video. Other than that, the Munstead is very similar. A little bit lower growing than the Hidcoto. These are both full grown. Both sides of these, this walkway, the plants are about 4 years old right now. If lavender is planted and harvested and pruned correctly, most of your lavenders have a 7 to 14 year lifespan. So they should be fairly long-lived perennials. The main thing is going to be about how you care about those plants. So these are two of our workhorse English lavenders, but there's a lot of other varieties and some differences that we want to show you also. So I mentioned there's more than 250 varieties of English lavender. These are two other varieties we're standing beside. The one on this side is called Violet Intrigue. Lavandula angustifolia Violet Intrigue. One of the lovely things about this lavender is it's a little bit closer together, the flowers are. Still very dark purple, very violet. And it's a little bit smaller in general. So it doesn't have a very long stem, but very pretty. So this row right here is Violet Intrigue. We've replaced some plants. I'm going to talk about that right now. This guy, covered with all these wonderful honeybees and bumblebees, this guy survived the last flood we had back 2 years ago with great gusto, actually, did really well. So he's about 4 years old. These guys here were replanted 1 year ago. So this part of the row here is about 1 year old. So a little bit different. You'll notice, and this is a good place to kind of see it, as you look down here beyond Dexter, you'll see that where Dexter is standing is about 6 inches lower than where the plants are. And what we've had to do here, because we do have that clay soil, is we have to dig in a lot of compost, about 30% compost, raise up the soil, and we're growing the lavender up about 6 inches above the basic soil level. So as we've replanted and as we're walking through, you'll really notice that there's areas where it's flat. Those are our older areas, and there's areas where we've really mounded up. And we've had 2 floods in the last 4 years, so we've learned that we have to mound things up in order to keep them doing really well. So we have Violet Intrigue on this side, and on this side we have a whole row of an English lavender called Mallet, Lavandula angustifolia Mallet. Now this lavender, as you're looking at it, probably people kind of go, oh, this is the least pretty of the lavenders so far. And that's probably kind of true. It's very far between nodes for the flowers, and the flowers they're pretty. And the calyx, they're okay. They're kind of a medium purple. But this particular variety of English lavender is the queen for essential oils. So if you're making an essential oil and you want the best quality lavender essential oil, you're going to use this one, Maillet. So we have another business with a farm down the road called Yerbas y Flores. And in that business, we actually distill lavender oil, and this is the only variety we distill. So English lavender, you get about 1/4 the amount that you will with some of the other lavenders. So we don't get a lot of essential oil, but it is truly a sweet, delicious fragrance. And the flavor is wonderful. So you can use that essential oil for medicine making, for colognes and perfumery, and for culinary use also. So it's a really wonderful oil. The plant itself, the flowers are like, they're okay, they're pretty enough, but it's not necessarily one you would choose, especially when I show you the next few. However, if you're doing essential oils, this is the one you would use. And as you're looking at the video, you'll notice the plants are starting to fall open a little bit. Within the week after we take this video, it's June 1st today, by about the 8th of June, these will have been harvested and we'll have started our essential oil processing, our distillation. So when that happens, we kind of let these get fairly dry. We're only watering this field once a week right now. And then we'll come back and we're really going to prune them. And again, I want you to look at that pruning video, but I'm just going to show you how far back we're going to prune. See where my clippers are? That's where we're pruning. I know everybody go, oh, that's a lot. They will look so ugly when we're done. Oh, yes, hello, photo bomber. But believe me, they will come out of it and you will have a long-lived lavender plant that way. So very important. But let's look at a few really pretty English lavenders next. Now we're going to look at a couple of English lavenders that I think are just primo for using in crafting. This in front of me here is a fairly new variety called Lavandula angustifolia Big Time Blue. This has been blooming for about 3 weeks. Again, this is June 1st here. So it's been blooming since early May, Mother's Day. And it is stunning as far as its color. The other thing I love about this variety is it's not so darn big, so you can put it at the front of like an area where you have your roses, for example. Lavender and roses are kind of a natural go together. And they will stay out of the way of the roses, but it will really complement. Now the bees, of course, are going full bore, but they're super busy. They're not really thinking about us. And so I'm going to take a few cuttings from here so we can kind of take a look at this flower. I mean, that is dark purple. The flower, the corolla part is dark purple, and then the calyx is this dark fuzzy purple. The other thing that's different from the English varieties we've looked at so far is it's very close between the nodes. So for example, when you go to put together your lavender to build like a wreath, look how close together and how full those look already compared to the other ones. So you'll be able to build a wreath very quickly and easily. It also is pretty good tasting. We tasted just the flower of the Hidcoto, but you can taste the bud, what we call the bud. It's actually the calyx, and it's sweet. So when you eat this, you don't get any sort of a weird mentholy flavor. This is fabulous for cooking with. So I would definitely grow this Big Time Blue. The other thing I love about this Big Time Blue, this is its second year, this go around. So last spring, it was beautiful. We pruned it back, it bloomed again. We pruned it back, it bloomed again. So here in California, we got 3 blooms from it. So that's great because the first one, maybe you can just enjoy the bees. The second one, you can start doing some crafting from. Then you'll get a bloom in the fall, and that one you can always use for doing some wintertime cooking or some crafting for gift making for Christmas, that kind of thing. So it's a smaller English lavender, really dark purple and really close together. So wonderful for cooking. Another one that's a newer variety for us to grow, English lavender, is this one down here. This one is Lavandula angustifolia Imperial Gem. It's another beautiful rebloomer. But you notice, again, you can see the difference here. So here's Imperial Gem, and here's Big Time Blue. So this one's going to be much easier to put a really thick wreath together. This one will also make a nice wreath, but you'll have to kind of overlap them a little more to get it nice and full. But both just beautiful and smaller growing. Again, this one's also about 2 years old. We're growing them on 18-inch centers, and you can see that they're separate. So both of these are great for smaller areas, for container gardening, especially because they do rebloom. One of the things about putting lavenders in containers is sometimes the lavenders only bloom once. So you lose your interest in the container. Part of the year you just have a green shrub. So this is great because you can prune it back and get bloom for much of the season. Both of these are good culinary lavenders, but they're great for crafting. There are lavenders that aren't purple, and they're very interesting and useful. This English lavender is called Lavandula angustifolia Melissa, and it is a pink and white lavender. So I'll put it up against the purple so you can catch the pinks a little bit more. So you notice parts of the flowers are more of a pinky, parts are white. It's got this really delicate look to it. The calyx, right, the little nubby part here, the calyx is actually like a silvery gray. It's going to dry that color. So maybe by itself it's not that pretty, but if you mix it in a wreath with purples, you're going to have that wonderful fragrance, and you're going to have two-tone colors. So if you want to do a lavender wreath that's not all dark purple, you can use some of the other lavenders. A lot of people, production people, grow this particular lavender specifically for cooking. A lot of the growers up in Oregon and Washington find Melissa to be the sweetest. It is pretty sweet. Yeah, it's pretty sweet. So this one is a delicious one for cooking. And how fun if you're doing a spring wedding or early summer wedding to be able to have white and pink lavender flowers. Really lovely. So Lavandula angustifolia Melissa. So it's important to know the exact name of the variety of English lavender, because the next English lavender we're going to look at is called Melissa Lilac. So some English lavenders are lovely because they have a two-tone color to them. The calyx is one color, the corolla is another color. So that's the case with the English lavender called Melissa Lilac. So Melissa Lilac, you can look at these flowers, and the corolla is a very light lavender color, and the calyx is a very deep violet. So you get this effect of having a two-tone color flower. This is really lovely in a patch of lavender because it looks totally different from all the other lavenders. So we've got our dark purple varieties, our whitish pink, and then this amazing two-tone. So this one dries well. It's nice for cooking. It's beautiful, again, if you're doing a lavender wreath of mixed colors, because you can add kind of that dusty purple in with it. It's about a 24, 26-inch tall plant, so it gets fairly large. Again, it's fairly short-stemmed, and it reblooms, so you have this really wonderful, lovely two-tone color. So the last English lavender I want to talk about today is called Jean Davis. So Lavandula angustifolia, Jean Davis, and this is truly a soft pink lavender. So you've got this beautiful pink color, no white to it at all, unlike, now you can kind of compare it a little bit to the Melissa. You see that the calyx part is that green color, so it's going to dry down to kind of a gray. It's definitely not going to be the most beautiful calyx. I don't know, I've never even used this one for crafting, but in the garden, if you're looking for a soft pink lavender, this is a great one to use. It is delicious, so you can cook with it. It's nice for floral arrangements for fresh. When it dries, you're not going to get an intense purple or that intense white color. It's really going to dry down to kind of a gray. But how nice to have this beautiful soft pink added to your garden. There are some other colors of pink, but Jean Davis is one of those lavenders that tends to be pretty sturdy for us, so we really like to include it in our garden. There are, of course, another 250 plus varieties of English lavender. It's always funny when someone brings me a leaf of a lavender and goes, "Can you tell me which variety this is?" And the answer is always no. So sometimes it's difficult to tell, even with just one stem. But there are some varieties like the Melissa Lilac, for example, that are fairly clear cut. They look so very different from the other English lavenders. But there is just a wonderful assortment. You can see here's just 4 or 5 varieties of the English lavenders, and you get different textures, different colors of the fresh part of the flower, the corolla, different textures and colors to the calyx. So when you're picking out your lavenders to grow, people say to me, "What's the best lavender?" And I say it depends on your use. And you should grow a couple different kinds of lavenders for different reasons and different times of bloom. So these English lavenders we've looked at, they tend to be bloomers from mid-May or early May through early July. You prune them back hard, as you're going to see in my pruning video, and then you get another bloom that way in early fall, at least here in California. If you're on the East Coast, you may only get the one bloom. So for a double bloom though, around here you would use the English lavender for that true floral fragrance and flavor. So for culinary reasons, especially anything sweet, you would use English lavender. So very specific for that reason. The most popular lavender in the world though, the one that's grown in production the most, is actually not an English lavender at all. It's an English lavender hybrid. We often call it a lavandin. And so I want to talk about all the possibilities that we can have of lavandins, of which there are, again, another 250. So we're going to look just at 5 or 6 of those varieties. The most popular is called Grosso. So Lavandula X intermedia, meaning it's a hybrid of 2 species, Grosso, most popular. So we grow a lot of that as well, and this is a good example that I can show you pour pruning. So I like to start over here with our pour pruning. This is Lavandula X intermedia Grosso, about 9 years old, never properly pruned. And I know a lot of you are going to go, "I have that plant. It looks just like that. Can I prune it?" So you'll want to look again at our pruning videos, but the answer, the fast, quick answer is no. This plant we are going to rip out this year after we're done harvesting. You note the flower stems are short here. So when you start to get a plant that's old and that hasn't been properly pruned, what you'll find is you start to lose vigor. So the flower stem is not really long. The flower itself is not really long. These should be really long. So I'm going to take a couple of stems off of here, and we're going to compare it to a Grosso lavender that's a little bit younger but has also been pruned better. Okay, so you notice here these aren't open yet. So the lavandins, the hybrid lavenders, tend to be later bloomers. They tend to be bigger, more robust, longer stemmed, and later bloomers. So these are just now starting to come into bloom, while all of our English lavenders have been blooming for 3 to 4 weeks already. So poorly pruned Grosso lavender. Well pruned lavender plants, like this little row here of Lavandula X intermedia Grosso, these guys have been well pruned. They'll continue to be well pruned. These are 5 years old, and they have a nice long stem. So in comparison, you have these stems on your well-pruned Grosso. Whoa, much longer. Much more beautiful with even some side branching on it. So same variety. Granted, this is a little bit younger, but this one was on a very poorly pruned plant, so much shorter, losing vigor. So here we have an example of a nice, healthy Lavandula X Intermedia Grosso flower stem. Nice and long. The flower stem is very tight. Notice that's almost 3 inches long probably. Nice tight flowers. The calyx is kind of a greenish purple. And the flowers as they open are kind of a medium color purple. So it's a very dark looking lavender. It's never going to be as intense as some of our English lavenders. So here you can compare. But look how much longer it is compared to, here's the one I told you I love so much, the Big Time Blue up against the Grosso. More than twice as long. So if you're trying to make a really long, beautiful, elegant wreath, or if you're trying to do a long, elegant, or if you're trying to mix these in with sunflowers, which is a perfect flower arrangement, this is not going to go very far. You know, with a big thing of sunflowers or in a vase, it doesn't have that elegant look that the Grosso is going to have. 80% of all production lavender is this one right here, Grosso. The reason is the essential oil is pretty high quality and you get a lot of essential oil out of it. So we have Mayette English lavender over here on the 3rd row. I'll get almost 4 times as much essential oil out of the same poundage of the Grosso. Plus, obviously, you're going to have a much bigger plant. You have a lot more flowers. The difference, people go, why don't you just grow that one then? Well, the flavor is very different. So again, we have the possibility of flowers. So right there is a flower. So I can eat that. It doesn't have that same floral flavor. There's a little bit of menthol or a little bit of camphor actually in it. But it's still okay. Here's the calyx, the little dried bud part. Yeah, not my cup of tea. And I don't want this in my cup of tea because it really tastes like camphor. So it's very strong. I would only use this for savory foods. If I was doing that Herbes de Provence blend where I'm mixing in dried lavender with thyme and marjoram and oregano, that's perfect. But for making jelly, no. And as a matter of fact, here's the funny story. We always do this class called the Day of Lavender here. We always make jelly. So, and we usually do it beforehand so we can show the class what it looks like when it's done. So we always do it from our beautiful English lavender, Hidcoto Blue. And one year my helper said, let's do Grosso because it's so popular and so many people grow it. So she made the jelly from Grosso and she brought the jelly to me and she said, what do you think? And instead of being that beautiful purpley color that lavender jelly usually is, when you use Hidcoto Blue, it was a rather unappealing shade of gray. So it turns out gray jelly is probably the least popular color in jellies. And then she said, try it. So I tried it. Oh my gosh, it tasted like a bar of soap, like something your mother would have forced down your throat when you were little and cussed, you know. It was horrible. So we learned very quickly that we really do mean it when we say different lavenders have different purposes. Savory food, not ice cream, not jelly. But beautiful, it is a popular essential oil. A lot of people use it for industrial purposes. So if you buy wet wipes that are lavender scented or laundry detergent that's lavender scented, this is the lavender you're getting, not the English lavender, which is far more expensive to produce. It does make a beautiful hedge though, and it's a bigger statement in your garden. So here we are 3.5 feet when it's blooming, this Grosso lavender. And even when it's not blooming, it's going to sit a good 2 feet off the ground, even when we prune it back really hard. So we plant these at least 24 inches apart. And really, if you want it to be individual plants, I would go 36 inches apart. So it looks kind of sad and lonely when you first plant it, but after 5 years, if you want to be nice and full, you want to make sure that you're not planting it so close that you lose a lot of the flowers and you cause a lot of rotting to exist in the plant. One thing I like to point out right here, because it becomes real obvious as you look down the row, most of this lavender is grown in full sun. That's sun from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. all day. California sun, 105-degree temperature. That's what lavender wants. So people are asking, how much? Full sun, all the time. When it gets a little bit of shade, and here we have a little grove of vitex trees, and so we get a little bit of shade midday, and you'll notice the first or second plant of almost every plant here has a little bit of lean towards the north because it's trying to lean towards the sun. So this is a classic one that people go, well, my lavender's leaning. I go, how much sun does it get? And sometimes they go, oh, like 3 or 4 hours, like that's a big deal. I'm like, no, lavender is native to the Mediterranean basin. It's native to North Africa. It's native to the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. It wants sun, sun, and then a little more sun. Okay, so we've shown you how it likes good drainage. We actually plant up on a little bit of a mound, and it likes full sun. And in the obvious thing it shows you when it doesn't get sun is that leaning towards the sun. You can never prune that back into a bush that's going to grow straight again so long as it's in partial shade. So just kind of a note, it's a really good example of what full sun means here. There are a lot of other varieties besides Grosso. So yes, Grosso is the most popular. Our second most popular is a variety called Provence. So let's take a look at a few more possibilities. So one of our other really popular lavandins is called Provence. Lavandula ex intermedia Provence. Oddly, this plant is more popular here in California than it ever will be in Provence. It's a hybrid that's used specifically in our area in the US. It's a very light purple color, still with that long stem. This plant is about 2 years old. Look how light that is. It's a silvery gray stem and a very light purple flower. So let's just compare. You can really get an idea. Here's your Provence, here's your Grosso. So even between the two, there's a huge difference. Provence is even more camphory flavored. So I really only use this one for one purpose, and that is for sachet bags. So there's another good reason, and there's a whole separate video on drying and cleaning your lavenders. This lavender here, the Provence, this one shatters, meaning when it's dry, you can easily pull all of the little calyces, all those little buds off and clean them easily. Whereas Grosso, you have to really smash them to get them off. Then you have to clean them very carefully before you can use them. So this one, Grosso, I use for wreaths. This one, Provence, I use for sachet bags. If you're trying to get a light purple color, very light, Provence is a great one. So Provence is a light purple. It has a very specific use, and we actually grow an entire 200-foot row of it for Yerba Flores. There we use it just for our sachet bags only. So it's a nice light purple color. So this is one of the newer varieties of lavandins that we grow. This one is called Lavandula ex intermedia Tuscan Violet. Last year, I actually showed a video of us pruning one of these, and I mistakenly called it Tuscan Blue. I'd only been growing it for a short time then, but it's actually called Tuscan Violet. It's a very long-stemmed lavender. So Tuscan Violet is light-colored, like the Provence. The stem is, oh my gosh, even longer. It's got this long, beautiful stem. It's a little bit long between the nodes, so it looks a little bit different. Again, here I've got Grosso and Provence. You can really tell the difference. And then you throw in a third one here. This one right here is your Tuscan Violet. So a little bit different, a little more open. This one has just a nice airy look to it. So if you're trying to get a little bit of airiness, this is perfect. Very lovely and open. It's definitely a silvery gray top though. It's not that dark purple that you get used to seeing with a lot of the English lavenders. These are all lovely. My favorite is actually one called Aureolii, and I want to show you that one. So this is Lavandula X Intermedia Aureolii, and this one was one of the most popular varieties for essential oils in France up until about the 1950s, where it got a particular root disease and needed to be replaced, and it was replaced with primarily Grosso. Again, it has a long, long flower stem and a long flower. So the nice thing about Aureolii is that it's really dark purple. The flower stems are very tight, the calyces are very dark purple, and the corolla, the flower petals, are also a dark purple. Still has that same bit of camphory flavor, but let's compare it to Grosso. Okay, so there's Grosso, there's Aureolii, really similar, very similar looking, but I think Aureolii is even a little prettier. I think the flowers are a little darker. You can use it for essential oil, and I just think it's a little more striking. Even as an individual plant, it really covers and fans out around the plant. Very beautiful. So this is definitely an older variety, grown in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and of course still in production now. And you can use this one for essential oil also, but it does have that heavier camphor flavor. If you're in an area with lots of cold, lots of snow, or as we have found recently, even in high humidity areas like down in Texas, there is a variety that's for you, and it's called Phenomenal. So we want to take a look at Phenomenal. This is a variety of lavandin called Phenomenal. So this is Lavandula X Intermedia Phenomenal. This one you can see is not as far along as the other varieties. It's also a little bit tighter, very dark purple with a really dark flower color. This variety was discovered in a nursery in Michigan, and it withstood snow, lots of cold, frost heave, but then it also was found to do well under high humidity conditions, like in South Texas, for example. So it is truly phenomenal because it covers a wide range of possibilities as far as temperature and humidity. We love it here. I think it's a beautiful variety. I also love it because it starts opening after all my other varieties have started to open of the lavandins. Here is Phenomenal. Phenomenal, notice that the buds are all tight. They're just barely starting to show some flowers here at the bottom. They're just going to be a lot longer before they are really open full bore. So the nice thing about growing Phenomenal is that you can harvest your Grosso, your Provence, your Tuscan Violet earlier, and then your Phenomenal will start to come into bloom. So that can be a later harvest for you. So you can really extend the time that you have your plants to harvest for all these beautiful lavender flowers. So just a reminder, not all lavenders are purple. This is Lavandula X Intermedia Cathy Blanc, and it's just opening up. Beautiful white flowers on a long stem. This would be a wonderful flower to add into wedding bouquets. It's long blooming, it's very long stemmed on a long plant, and so you can really cut it and get a nice flower bouquet out of it. So beautiful choice for a wedding arrangement. So there are over 250 varieties of lavandins again. So you can choose short or long stems. You can get really large plants. This is Lavandula ex intermedia Grappenhall. And this plant, when it's full blooming, gets clearly up to about 4 feet. This is kind of our big statement lavender. You'll notice this one hasn't even started to open at all yet. It will look very similar to the Tuscan Violet or to the Provence as far as its flower color. But if you're looking for a super long stemmed lavender, this is a great possibility. So very big and elegant. If you need a large lavender, this is a good choice. If you want a lavandin that has a huge flower, then I would suggest Super. This is Lavandula ex intermedia Super. It's got a really big fat flower head. Again, it's on a large plant. This one, you'll see this entire row here will get up to, again, 3.5 to 4 feet. And look at the size of the flower. That's a big flower. It's a big fat flower head, especially when you compare it to some of these others. Again, this is one we would probably mostly use for sachets because of that light color and because it does fall and clean off the stem very quickly and easily. And the bees love it even once we cut it. So it's a really nice selection for a big fat flower. It really is stunning even though it's a lighter lavender color. So another reason for selecting certain lavenders is the kind of craft you're going to do with it. Here I have a beautiful finished lavender wand. It's a wonderful craft project where all of the flowers are actually inside this heavy fat portion right here. You do this craft when the plant material is fresh only. So if you have a nice big chunky flower, like the Super for example, then 7 to 9 of these is going to make a really nice big thick lavender wand, where if you're using a really skinny flower, you'll have to use more in order to get a nice big wand. So I would select something like Super to make my lavender wands, because that way you're going to get a nice full lavender wand with fewer pieces and therefore less work. So on the other extreme is we have a lavender that has a very slender flower. This one is a hybrid called Gross Blue. And I'm going to cut off a few to show how long the stems are on this one. So you notice Gross Blue is a long ways away here on June 1st from opening to its color. You can see that now, even though it's closed, it's going to be a really dark purple. And when Gross Blue comes into bloom, and you'll notice it's going to be one of the later ones to come into bloom, it won't really be blooming for like 3 more weeks after this, it sells immediately as a fresh cut flower because it's long and elegant, and it's so dark purple, both the calyx and corolla, that people will buy a couple of bunches of this and a bunch of sunflowers, and it makes a stunning arrangement. So Gross Blue, again, is a little open and airy looking. So you can have another plant in the background if you want something to be right behind it, but it's tall and elegant. So it has a very different statement in the garden than some of the low-growing English lavenders we looked at first that have a very formal look even when they're just growing wild. So a whole different look in the garden. Again, I wouldn't cook with this one necessarily, but I would use this one in fresh arrangements, and as a dried flower in an arrangement, it's a beautiful plant. So we've talked about English lavender and we've talked about the lavandins. There are actually 26 species of lavender and many different selections and varieties. So I want to kind of look at a couple of other beyond the 2 that we normally plant in our garden. The first one I love is this one here, Lavandula Goodwin Creek Gray. Lavandula Goodwin Creek Gray is a French lavender hybrid. So it is a Lavandula dentata hybrid. It was discovered in the Goodwin Creek Gardens, a little nursery up in Oregon, as a seed selection. And it is just stunning and beautiful all the time. This lavender blooms in the fall, in the winter, in the spring, in the summer. So you just prune it back occasionally to get fresh flowers on it. Has a whole different look to it. In the fall, when I don't have any of the lavandins to make lavender wands, I use this one to make my lavender wands. So it has a very dark purple corolla, and then the calyces are that very dark gray. How does it taste, you ask me? I know. Not good at all. It is like eating a Christmas tree. Yeah. I do not cook with this one. The French lavender, which is Lavandula dentata, is only used for landscaping, not for any culinary purpose. I would not eat this in any form, but to have this for Christmas Day as a fresh cut flower, to have it in the spring as a fresh cut flower, in the fall, you prune it back when it starts to look a little funky, when you don't see a lot of bees on it anymore, so you don't have a lot of flowers. Prune it back like you would your other lavenders, and then it comes right out of it again, and it looks beautiful. This is a nice one for a container, again, because you're going to get a visual look of it from the flowers almost all the time. It's a great honeybee plant. So I love it for landscaping. I love it for container gardening. The only thing I don't do with it is I don't cook with it. It's very beautiful. It also has that silvery gray. It's super drought tolerant. Right beside it, we have another hybrid called Silver Frost. Silver Frost is one of my favorites. I wish you could feel this. This could be like your pet. It's so soft and fuzzy. The calyx is super fuzzy and silvery gray, and then it has that stunning violet flower. So again, you get that two-toned effect from this plant. This is a Lavandula lanata hybrid. We don't grow many lanatas. They're kind of short growing, and by themselves they aren't that stunning. But when you feel it, the leaves are fuzzy, the flowers are fuzzy. It is super drought tolerant. You could put this in a location that gets very little water and it would do just fine. It also is great in a moon garden because you can see how silvery gray it is, and the flowers before they open are really silvery gray white, and then all of a sudden you get this incredible pop of these dark purple flowers. This one we include a lot in our wreaths because it gives you such a different impact. So if you're, again, don't just think of a lavender wreath as dark purple, think of all of the different shades you can get with the lavender. This is a great one to add. You can also use this for a lavender wand because it's another thick one. It is not the tastiest of lavenders, so again, we don't usually cook with this particular one. But it's stunning as a fresh cut flower in an arrangement, as a dry flower, very fragrant, heavy fragrance. But I'll be brave, I'm willing, I'll risk for you guys. Gosh, horrible. I'm just gonna be honest. It's worse than eating a pine tree. So save this one for all the other stunning things you can do with it, all the flower arranging and all of the wreath making. Oh man, that tastes bad. Yuck. There are other species of lavenders that I don't have growing out in my field. The field we do specifically because we cut so much for fresh cut. We do a lot of dry cutting also, and then we also use a lot for sachets and for essential oil and lots of other purposes. There are a lot of lavenders that are great to just grow in the landscape because they're beautiful, they're unusual, and they bloom early in the year. This one is a Spanish lavender. So common names are always a struggle because they can really vary widely from place to place. This one here we call a Spanish lavender. It is Lavandula stoicus. They all have these beautiful little, we call them butterfly wing flowers at the top. So most of the flower is down below in kind of this thick piece here. So here's all your little flower buds, and they're a deep violet. The nice thing about Anouk White is it has a white and a purple flower. So it's really kind of stunning and unusual. This is a shorter growing Spanish lavender also. It only gets about 18 inches tall. You see these growing a lot in commercial landscapes, so in where there might be apartment buildings or maybe some sort of a store or something like that, and that's because they're super easy to grow, they're super easy to maintain. So I'm going to sacrifice this poor guy, so we're going to really love those flowers, and then I'm going to show you what we do to keep it looking good. We prune it. I know everyone on the other side of the camera here is going, oh my gosh, that's how much you're going to prune it? Yes. I did not choose the best clippers here for pruning, but we are going to prune it that much. So we're really cutting back here. I know that looks like a lot, but this is how much you need to prune it by if you want it to stay beautiful looking. So that's how much we're going to cut it back by. So half. And again, you really get a good view of this when you look at it on our pruning videos. You know, prune it back a lot, and that way it will come back and give you a second bloom. So you get a bloom in April, May, and into June with these Lavandula stoicus, these Spanish lavenders. If they get pruned back in many of our locations, you're going to get a second bloom come August, September, October. They obviously are great for honeybees. I am not going to taste the flowers here because I already know what they taste like. The Spanish lavenders are probably the most ancient medicinal lavenders. So these were found in writing for medicinal purposes as far back as 67 AD. So very long use medicinal, even though we now use the other lavenders more often for medicinal purposes. But these have been with us and cultivated by humans for several centuries at least. There are Spanish lavenders that have purple at the top, that have pink at the top. I love these white ones. I just love that striking bicolor flower. It's really pretty, but lots of choices. So Spanish lavender we use for landscaping. Another species of lavender that is probably our least hardy lavender we grow, this is Lavandula pinnata, or fernleaf lavender. Native to the Canary Islands, it actually has kind of a spicy lemon lavender fragrance. I don't cook with this one. It doesn't give you a lemon lavender smell or flavor to it, but it is a beautiful one for landscaping. This one will start blooming in March or early April here in California, and it will bloom until November. It's not very hardy, so about half the time we actually lose this plant to the freeze. About half the time it survives. So we grow it as an annual in most parts of the country. It's great because you stick it out in the ground, it starts blooming, and it blooms continuously all the way through summer until the day it freezes back. It has a very different flower. So completely different. A lot of people don't even recognize this as a lavender. We grow this one not just for honeybees, but for butterflies. We don't get a lot of butterflies to the lavender, but Lavandula pinnata definitely attracts quite a few butterflies. It's also a whole different look than a lot of other lavenders. And one of the nice things about this lavender is you can grow this lavender in part shade and it will still bloom really well. So all the lavenders we've talked about so far, like sun, sun, and then sun. And this lavender will take half-day sun, so 4 or 5 hours, and still bloom really well and grow as a nice upright plant. So Lavandula pinnata, whole different lavender use. Finally, a new lavender from the Sunset Western Garden series. This is Lavandula Allardii Merlot. So this is a hybrid between Lavandula dentata and Lavandula allardii, and it has a variegated leaf. So this is really a fun and beautiful lavender, just even if you're growing it for the leaf color and texture. Gets a couple feet tall, really stunning looking. So even if it never bloomed, you have an awfully beautiful looking plant in the garden or in a container. It does put on a medium purple blossom. The first year they were really touting it as a non-blooming lavender, which of course nobody wants a non-blooming lavender. But what they've discovered in the test gardens is that it actually puts on a flower that's very much like Provence or the Tuscan Violet flower, so a light violet flower. It's very pretty. This one is also a part shade lavender. So I planted one about 2 years ago out in full sun, and it grew exactly 2 inches in 2 years, and it's always on death's doorstep. So that's why we're not filming that one. I just saw it back where it's doing well in the Sunset Test Gardens, and it's in dappled afternoon shade. So I'm going to replant mine in some dappled afternoon shade, and hopefully I'll get a nice beautiful plant like they have at the Sunset Test Gardens that's about 2 feet tall and 2.5 feet wide. Beautiful variegated foliage, so even when it's not blooming, it looks beautiful. And in full bloom, it's just a real stunning specimen plant. Easy to grow. It is a little bit winter, has problems with a lot of winter, so if you want to do it in a temperature that's going to be less than about 20 degrees, you'll probably do it as an annual, or you'll bring it inside during the winter time, because it doesn't like a hard freeze and it doesn't like snow at all. But even if you're doing it as an annual, it's a beautiful plant and it's a great one for a little shade. So it's a wonderful selection that's, again, unlike all the lavenders we looked at early on in the series. So with your lavenders, again, I do have a lot of other videos, so there's a lot more to know about lavenders than just the varieties. It's great to be able to, in one tiny little space and time, look at so many lavenders and see what they're doing in bloom, to remind us that some will come into full bloom while some haven't even started to bloom at all yet. Just a couple of reminders to people. We're growing our lavenders in full sun, really important. We're growing them on a bit of a mound, so even if you're adding your lavender to an existing bed, you're going to dig in some compost, you're going to work it up into a little mound, and you're going to plant it on the top of that mound. The other thing is lavender doesn't like a lot of water. So I did point that out with one of our lavenders, that you can keep it basically water-free once it's established. But most of our lavenders, we try to only water once a week deeply. So that would be the most water you'd want to give it. Obviously, if it's in a mixed bed, you may be watering it more often. If you're in the Midwest or the South, of course, you're going to get natural rainfall during the summer. You really have to make sure that you've dug in some compost, or if you're in a really wet area, you can even add a mix like a cactus mix, and you're going to want to make sure that you lift up that soil so you get excellent drainage in natural rainfall areas. Next week is the final week of our video series all about herbs. For the final week, we are going to talk about the tea herbs. It's getting warm, and I want a nice cup of tea in the morning and then a nice glass of iced herb tea in the afternoon. Which teas do we want for getting up? Which teas do we want for relaxing in the evening time? We'll talk about all the possibilities you can add to your garden next week. If you notice behind me, we have an unusual plant that is our most photographed plant at the nursery. This is Agave Americana. It was planted 22 years ago by one of our apprentices. It was a little 1-gallon pot, and now it's put out its big, giant final flower. That flower has occurred just in the last 5 weeks. 5 weeks ago, there was nothing. It's probably one of the biggest agave americanas I've ever seen, and with the flower, it's more than 30 feet tall. One person called it the death flower because once it blooms, the entire plant will die. Fortunately, we have some little pups, and of course, all those flowers are going to produce a lot of seeds. So we're going to have a lot of offspring of our giant agave americana to share with other customers. This plant is being photographed like crazy right now by people who come to visit it. Sometimes specifically come to visit it because they see it on our Instagram or Facebook posts. It's really fun. I'll be sad to see it die because even though it's real thorny and I've run into it a million times and cussed at it, it's also stunning, beautiful architectural feature in the garden. And I guess we're going to have to grow it another 22 years to get another plant that big. So we will see you next week for week 8.